Okay, so what we can see here is me painting with contrast paints on the Joan of Arc minis. Now I've started with contrast paint, a very bright blue really, called Talisar Blue. Um, I'm using a size, I want to say size 0 brush to apply this. They are small, 15mm miniatures, so they require a little bit of in-depth to work. Now, as I go around this, the whole cloak of this particular miniature, I'm following the art on the unit card for this. And what you can see as I'm applying it, hopefully, is how good these contrast paints are in terms of ease of use. No need for highlighting, no need for washing. You literally just slap it on. So you can see there, you've got the difference in contrast, hence the name of the paint, with the blue as I'm applying it. Now, what I've actually opted to do for this video is do 4 of these miniatures, 4 of the other foot knights, and 1 peasant miniature, which I've left out basically. These have all been primed with a Rathbone spray paint. I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, the Rathbone primer is the best one for contrast paints. To be honest, I'm tempted, because when I'm not using contrast paints, I tend to do a zenithal highlight, which is a kind of grey, and then you spray over on the white above it at a 45-degree angle. And why I really like zenithal is it highlights the detail, so it's easy to see where to paint. I would say Rathbone does that just on its own really quite well, so I'm probably from now on, I'm going to just prime all my miniatures with Rathbone, even if I'm not using contrasts, or a mix of the two. That's what I ultimately see myself doing, is perhaps using both. The contrasts when it makes sense to use them, and then just normal painting with a wet palette otherwise. So, as you can see, I'm finishing up the first miniature. Now, what I'm doing there is I made a little bit of mistake. So, if you make a mistake with contrasts, before it dries, what you can do is just with your brush, is just brush over it, take away that paint. You can always use a little bit of water. It won't completely get rid of it, but it'll certainly lighten it up. So that's what I was doing there. I got a bit of the blue on the leg. I didn't particularly want it on the leg because that's supposed to be metal. In hindsight, it didn't actually matter because I'll be using Leadbelcher for the metal, and that would go over any mistakes anyway. But you know, just for neatness, I decided to try and get rid of that blemish. Okay, so that's the first one done. For the other 3, what you'll notice with the video, like now, is I've sped it up. Sped it up to 8 times the speed, just because it's the same process, the same step on the other 3 miniatures. So here I'm painting the other 3, and it really doesn't take long at all. I know I've sped this up, but if you imagine the first one, it took about the same time to do the other 3. And it's quite nice to do. It's not, I wouldn't call it batch painting because we're only talking about 4 miniatures. But you know, you are getting a fair amount done in a small amount of time. And while you've got the paints out and you're doing the stages, it makes sense to kind of go over the same miniatures at the same time. Now we're moving on from the blue to one of my favourite contrast paints, which is the Apothecary White. So it's kind of like a grey rather than a white, as you can see. But as I start to apply this, you'll see how good it is. I mean, I don't like stark white paint for the white effect of miniatures. And it was so hard to do before contrast paints. I was using things like Null oil to kind of put a base on and highlight over with whites. And that's basically what you had to do to get those kind of contrasts and those shades. Now, I just love this. I love this. Technically, I suppose it is a grey, and you could, you know, if you really wanted to, and I probably will do in the future, you can layer over with pure white after you've applied your Apothecary White contrast to really make it look more white, I suppose, than grey. But to be completely honest, once it dries, it looks very white. I think the result is fantastic. And again, look how easily it is to apply these paints. It's very quick. It's very, very easy, and I just love it. I love it for that fact. So that's that done. And now we're going to move on to, I believe, just the shields of the other foot knights. So if you look at the picture on the card art, we've got like a red base with a few little patterns and then a white top. So I'm just going over kind of loosely the top. Obviously the red will go over the white, so I'm not too fussed about that. Something to make a note of with these contrast paints is that you can't kind of go over colours. It won't work. So once you've painted one contrast colour, you can't really go over with another. Now, I don't do this personally. You can mix them if you buy a special medium that's just for these contrast paints, because they've got like acting agents that make it so they dry and they pool in the recesses and all the rest of it. Okay, so as I mentioned before, for the metal, we're going to be using Leadbelcher. Now, I'm going to try something I haven't tried before with these miniatures, which is putting a kind of base layer coat of Leadbelcher on all the metal parts, and then I'm going to go over with contrast colours to go over that metal. Now, I've obviously heard that this is something to be done, and a really good positive with contrast paints. I've just never personally done it before. For all of my metal before this with contrast paints, I've literally just used Basilicanum grey, and just use that. So a kind of non-metal metallic effect. But I wanted it to be better than that for this video, so I thought I'd try this. So now I'm going over all the metal parts, including any gold, because these in the picture they do have some gold parts to the knights here. And just being careful not to go over the blue, obviously. Another thing with the disadvantage of contrast paints, if you make a mistake, so if I went over the blue with this metal, with this Leadbelcher, I could try and get it off with water, obviously, and the paintbrush, but it probably wouldn't work. And you can't just touch up with contrast paints because it will just completely ruin the effect. So what you actually have to do is you have to paint the area with a primer again and then go back over it. So you really don't want to make mistakes with contrast paints, and that is the massive disadvantage of them. When you're talking about the scale that we're talking about here with the 15mm scale, you just got to be a steady hand. I always liken contrast paints to watercolors. So when you paint compared to acrylics, which is kind of like what you've got with watercolor painting, you do light colors first, then you move on to the darker colors afterwards. And the reason why is because you can't put a light color back over a dark color, which I guess is obvious. It's very similar with these contrast paints. You've got to be really careful not to make mistakes with it, and then you're fine. It's a one coat process, which is superb for it. Obviously, you can think of what I'm doing now with this miniature is this Leadbelcher is like a second primer, I guess is the best way to think of it. So I'm putting a different type of primer to put those contrast paints on it. But what you can see with this picture is that blue has really started to pop. It's now dry, and it really does show the contrast with the blue coat. I absolutely love it. And personally, I really like the vivid colours for this game. So we're speeding it up again for the other three miniatures with the two-handed weapon. And as you can see, just being careful not to go over any of the other bits. And we're slowly going through this. Again, this is 8 times speeded up, so relatively sped up. But you can see, again, not taking a huge amount of time. This was probably the most time-consuming step, I would say, because I didn't want to obviously get it over the blue coat, which was quite hard to do. Well, not hard, but it was a bit tricky in parts. Okay, so that's the two-handers done. Oh no, nearly. We've just got one more. And then once we've done the two-handed foot knights, we go to the normal foot knights with like the pickaxe, and because they are mostly covered in metal, you'll see when we come up to it, which I think is in a second, I switch brushes to a larger brush. So I think this is a size 2 or 3. I think it's a size 3 brush, so a relatively big brush. This was a cheap brush. It was part of a set. I think it cost me £7 for 10 brushes. So we're talking about like a cheap brush. The one that I predominantly use, that you've seen me use up till this point, was a Series 7. So I invested it was £10 off eBay. It's a Western Newton Series 7 size 0 brush, and my word, it's so good. I would highly recommend just buying one brush, a decent brush, looking after it, and buying that one brush that you do most of your work with. Now, you might want to go to size 1. I would say size 1 for general painting would probably be a better size. They had actually run out of stock while I was buying this one, so that's why I went to a 0. I would ideally want a size 1 for that Series 7. So, as you can see here, making sure, I didn't mention this, but making sure to use water, okay? So with the contrast paints, obviously don't use water. Don't thin them down or anything using water. It'll basically make them so they don't work. When I go to Leadbelcher, which is just a Citadel base colour, normal paint, making sure I'm using water all the time. I'm actually putting it onto the wooden, I don't know what you call it, paint board that I'm painting on. I just put a dash of that on there, and then making sure I wet it every time I go to that paint. Because you want, obviously, your paints to flow. And just in a general point, if you do use normal paints, I would highly recommend a wet palette, because you can blend your colours together. You can keep them wet. Now we're speeding up again as we do the other 3 miniatures of that range. So if you blend a colour and you really like that colour and it works, the wet palette will keep it wet effectively, so you can use it again the day after or even 2 days after. Whereas if you just use a normal dry palette, it's going to dry in a matter of minutes. So wet palettes are, I would say, essential if you're thinking of using normal paints and especially blending. So making sure I'm using the water and keeping it moist when I use those metals. Okay, now I've gone back to my Series 7 just to fill in the smaller detail. Because again, I don't want to go over what I've painted so far. You notice before I started this video, all I had done was paint the green handles for these guys' weapons. Everything else I will paint in this video. The total time that I spent painting, real time, was about 1 hour and 10 minutes. So obviously I've sped up parts of this video, so the total time of this video is about 33 minutes. So I'm just going over the kind of the base of the pickaxe there, and the gauntlet, and maybe bits near the shield as well. And this is the only non-contrast paint I use in the whole painting series, okay? And you'll see when we come to the effects, I think it's definitely something I'm going to be doing in the future. This idea of using Leadbelcher as a kind of base coat and then using the contrast paints to go over it. I love the effect it gives. So that'll be on everything I do, I think, from now on. Okay, so we're just touching up the last few minis. You'll notice their belts are still unpainted, so I'm going to have to go to that eventually. Just making sure it's all up to the edges where it should be. And you see that they're coming along. One more to do. I perhaps should have fast forwarded this particular part. I didn't realise I hadn't. And we are now finishing touches of the last knight there. Just getting up towards that belt. Okay. Now I know that I'm just using my hands to hold these. Now I do normally have I can't see it in this video. I do normally have a Games Workshop, a Citadel, sorry, holder, miniature holder when I paint. But obviously because there's such small scale, I don't use it. So I just use my hands. Right, sorry, we've moved on now to Snakebite Leather. Another absolutely essential contrast colour. If you're talking about a brown, this is the best brown. It does leather, as the name suggests, but it also is brilliant for wood, as you're seeing here. So again, the great thing about these, one coat and you're done. And I think you'll see the speed with this particular miniature, more so than the metal that I'm doing on the other miniatures. Now I'm just looking at my other miniature that I had completed, just for reference sake. I haven't got the unit card for the peasant at the moment. We got the straps as brown, the hood as brown, and we also got the satchel that we're going to do, and the shoes. So a fair amount of this model, it looks really quite. I think it looks really quite good once you've just done those brown parts. So going over the hood, again, making sure to try not to get it on the face. Now, my big gripe with just Citadel paints in general are the lids. You can't really see it in this shot, but the lid cuts shut and close, which means you can't use your one hand to just pick up some paint. They're brilliant for pooling a little bit for all the contrast paint you need inside the lid, so all you have to do is literally put it in, but if the lid doesn't stay open, that's pretty much pointless. I know people have like poured them into Citadel paints into like dropper bottles to alleviate that fact, but you're going to be wasting Citadel contrast paints if you do that, because you're going to have to drip it out into a palette or whatever it might be, and you're going to start to lose some of that paint through absorption and evaporation, and also that may change the consistency and how the contrast paint works. So I'd highly recommend still using the bottles that the contrast paints come in. It's annoying. It's really annoying, as you can see there. I've got to lift the lid to get the paint, and then I have to pick the miniature up. It's a little gripe, but it is quite annoying after a time. You notice there I went out slightly over the satchel there. I make a bigger mistake in a second when I go over the feet, and then we do the same process as we did before, where we try and get rid of the paint. And here you go. I'm going over the belt and the strap and just the edge of the satchel. Excellent. And now we're going to move on to the boots, and this is where I overestimate the size of the boots. So just going over, and there we go, we've gone over the boots, and I went, oh dear. So I carry on thinking, is this going to work? Can I get away with this? By doing the rest of that boot, and then I go, I don't think I can. So here I go, I clean the brush, and then just as before, just go over, pick up that paint, get rid of it off a tea towel or whatever, not tea towel, kitchen roll. So start to take away that paint. Now, again, it depends on what you're going to paint over that mistake. In this case, he's got yellow trousers. So it's not a big problem that I actually went over that mistake. So it's not a huge problem. If you're going to do that white, that's going to be a problem, and you might need to base coat that again. So just doing the other foot, and as you can see, that brown, I just love that brown. It just really comes out well. It works really well with fur as well. If you want to do fur, how I do fur is I use a contrast paint. Then you want to do a kind of dry brush highlight over it. Sorry, now I'm moving over to Blood Angels Red. I believe this is to do the shields, the bottom half of the shields of the foot knights. Blood Angels Red is a very vivid red. It's really, really nice again. And the contrast, I love the contrast nature of these paints. As you can see, it's already getting in the recesses. And because it's really quite a wet paint, I suppose, it's easy to apply. So details are relatively easy to do as well. So there you go, I'm just putting the little added extras. Right, now we'll speed up for the other three. Didn't take long at all, really. Just trying to get a relatively straight edge on that on the top of the shield. Now we're moving on to the yellow. Now this, I would say, is probably the other essential colour in the contrast range. Yellow is so hard to do with normal paints to give it like a really nice look. The Yaden yellow, which is what this is, it's brilliant. It's a superb colour. Massively highly recommend it. Now what I'm actually going to do with this first of all is apply the first contrast over the metal. So this is going to act like gold, and it's the first time I've ever done it, was on this video, and I was really, really pleased with the results. So you literally just paint it over the top of the Leadbelcher, the metal. And now I'm having a little look to see how it looks. I'm quite pleased, so I just carry on doing the elbow parts of this particular miniature. And I think that's all that's gold in the artwork of this miniature. So I'm having a little look just to see how it's looking, and I'm really pleased with the results. I'm thinking that looks just what I wanted it to look like. So let's fast forward for the rest of these 3 miniatures of this range. Again, it's not loads to do for that particular miniature. So that's really quite quick. And now we move on to the foot knights. Now these have got a little bit more detail. Apologies if the miniature goes out of shot here. I was trying, because you're doing such fine detail, sometimes it's hard to keep it in the same position. So we move on to the gauntlet and the elbow, which it's the first bit of detail. Then I'm just thinking, what's the best one to do next? And it looks as though the stripes that are on its chest plate and its back plate is the next thing to do. So we're just doing a couple of lines on the chest and on the back. You'll see the back one's done. There we go, one across there and one above it. Because in the art, it's got like a striped metal plate armor. So I wanted to replicate that. And then we go down the bottom. The bottom of the chainmail vest is also got a gold trim. So we're going down there with the gold. Like so. The knee pads. Or I don't know what you would call them. Not pads, I presume. And then the feet as well. Now with the very first miniature, I kind of painted this whole feet gold. I wasn't happy with that. So in the subsequent miniatures, I've kind of painted a stripe across the top. Just one of those plates of the foot armor is actually gold. And then also with this miniature, when I was doing the sides of the helmet, I did way too much gold compared to what should have been, and then I changed that on subsequent models as well. But just done that one, and I'm really happy with that result. So we fast forward onto the other 3. Again, it doesn't take long. Once you've got that base coat down, you're flying. You really are flying. And this is the final one, I believe. Okay. So we've now, while we got the yellow out, the peasant has yellow trousers, so we do the trousers. I mean, this just goes to show how quick it can be. It's a nice, easy, small amount of area, and it's just literally go round the leg, putting one layer of the contrast paint. Don't be afraid to use a fair amount of paint. Not too much. You don't want it to pool up because that doesn't look realistic. But don't be afraid to use some paint. And there you go. He's so close to being done. So that's the yellow done. So moving back to two-handed, we're going to look at the handle now. So the handle is a red and blue striped handle. So we got the Blood Angels red again and the Talisar blue again. So starting with the red, and we're kind of doing stripes. So just be a little bit careful of this. You don't really want red on his tunic or the metal that you've literally just done. The metal's not as big a problem because again, all you need to do at this point is just go back over the mistakes that you've done with Leadbelcher. It'll go straight over it. It's not going to be a problem. But ideally, you kind of want to be doing one takes with contrast paints. That's really what they're built for. Here you can see the red contrast paint tub is actually keeping its lid open. So when this happens, they're a joy to work with. You've got the pool of paint that you can just grab from. Nice, quick and easy. Sorry, I do have a bit of a cold, so that's why my voice isn't great. So here we go, and we've just done the red. So now we move on to the blue to complete the handles. And as you can see, the blue lid is not as good. And this is a real common thing. It's so annoying. Okay, so now in hindsight, maybe if we had a different blue, it might have been better because this is the exact same blue as the tunic. But to be honest, the end result I was pretty happy with. I didn't mind so much that it's exactly the same colour. Excellent. So that's just touching up that bit there. Don't want white showing. Okay, and we fast forward the other 3. Right, so that's the handles done. Next, we move on to probably the one of the final stages of the peasant. So for skin, if you're using contrast paints, Guilliman Flesh is brilliant. It's for once over, it's great. And you'll see with this scale of miniature, it's fantastic. As you start to get to a bigger scale, like your 35, 40 mils, it's not quite as good. It isn't quite as good because the bigger the area that you're covering with this paint, the worse the paint behaves and gives as a result. Flat surfaces, it's awful at. So if you're talking about like tanks or whatever, you wouldn't use contrast paints. What you want is lots of different recesses where you can really see the contrast happening in these paints. So at 50 mil, obviously it's brilliant. Right, now we're going to the belt with Shyish Purple. I like this purple. It's a nice deep purple. And we've got to be careful with this because obviously we do not want to go over the gold and any of the other bits that we've done with so far in this miniature. And I'm happy to say that the previous two mistakes I've made, little mistakes, little paint overs, they're the only two I make on this entire video. So if you're relatively careful, you shouldn't need to do anything else other than just apply those one coats. So going over the scabbard and the belt with the purple, and now we do the other three. And again, just using that Series 7 brush, I'm using that pretty much predominantly for most of my painting. I really do love it. Right, Basilian Grey, the best grey you can buy. It's lovely for stonework. As I said before, non-metal metallics, what I have used previously. But on this, I'm just finishing off this miniature now with his knife. So just literally putting a one coat of this Basilian Grey onto the knife. Make sure I get the handle, the end of the handle coming out of the hand there. And he is complete. So that is the first miniature done. And as you can see, the contrast paints really do pop with this scale of miniature. Okay, so moving on to the two-handed, we're now going to go over all of the metal with Basilian Grey to give that now a contrast. Now, you could do this with non-oil, I suppose, but I just feel that this, I just wanted to try this technique and I was really pleased with it. It does give a dull metal look, but to be honest, for the times, that kind of fits. Now I'm going around the gold with this particular miniature, being sure I don't go over the gold that I put onto the Leadbelcher for this case. When we move on to the other miniature, the other Foot Knight, I just go over the whole lot. In fact, I think I go over the Shyish Purple as well. I don't think that's a massive problem because the nature of this grey, it seemed to work over other contrast paints. It didn't completely mask them or anything like that. So I'm just going over all the metal with the Basilian Grey. Basilian Grey, is it? Basilican Grey. Or whatever it's called. And as you can see, even with this stage, the miniature's really starting to come alive now. So I just wanted to show, as my first time doing with that grey over metal, I was really pleased with the results. It still looks like metal, but it looks like that kind of dull metal that you would expect to see. It shouldn't be really, really shiny. It doesn't want to look like plastic metal either. So we're just doing the other three. And I'm really pleased at this stage with this particular unit. The blue's just look at that blue. It just looks so good. It is bright, but I think that just adds to it. Right, here I'm contemplating. I'm thinking, right, can I just go over the whole miniature like I did with the base coat of the metal? So I start by getting the Series 7, the size 0 brush, and I'm going, right, I'll go around the gold parts. So I go round the head, but actually go over the gold part of the head of the helmet at this point, and I noticed that it's actually not covering the gold. It dulls it slightly, but that wasn't a bad thing. So I think, yep, I think I'm okay to shoot ahead, get the bigger brush, the size 3, and just plaster this this contrast paint onto it. So here you go, from the feet going up, and as you can see, it just gives a really nice contrast to the metal, which is what you want really with contrast paints, of course. Now, if you go over, I went a tiny bit over the shield there. Again, that's not a problem. Just think about the nature of what you're painting. It's going to have a few dinks, a few discolorations in the shield anyway. So don't worry too much about going over the parts of the shield and things like that. And you want some different contrast, different shades on your miniature as well. So you know, if you get more of the I was going to say wash. If you get more of the contrast paint on one part than the other, I don't think it's a big problem. Just doing the hammer or the pick at the moment. And again, I'm not too fussed about getting it on the handle because again, it just adds to the realism of the miniature. Really pleased with that. So let's go on with the other 3. Now you can basically put any color contrast paint over metal. So I've just shown putting yellow to make gold and grey to make normal grey colour. You can put blue, you can put red, you can put anything, and it will give you that metallic look to your contrast colour. And I think that's a really, really cool aspect of it. Right, now we move to Cygor Brown. This is a really, really dark, deep brown, okay? And I want to do the belts of the two-handed knight now. So again, being as careful as I possibly can within time restraints. I don't particularly want to spend ages and ages on it. We just go around the belt, making sure we get that little loop that is below his left arm there, just to get that one as well. And just checking above and below, making sure we don't get any kind of like white areas that they've got no paint on them. So I'm just checking now just to see if there's anything. Excuse me, and it all looks good, as you can see from that picture. By the way, at the end of this video, I'll show some still frames of all 3 miniatures, so you can kind of see what they look like. So let's fast forward through the other 3 of these belts, and we're coming towards the closing stages of this paint, and that's it. So I just wanted to show the peasant. There we go. That he was so quick to paint, so quick. If you think about how much time I spent actually just on that one, there's the foot knight with a pick, and you can really see how that metal's really come out well. I love that how well that metal's come out. And the two-handed, just look at this blue. Look at that blue. It's beautiful. So it's a quick way of getting some, what I feel are really good results using your contrast paints. So that's the set of miniatures I painted. As I said, about an hour and 10 minutes for those.